Hello everyone and welcome back. It's Jessa Lynn, and today I am offering a new feature on my channel that I wanted to tell you about. So I have decided to begin a YouTube membership essentially for $5 a month. And what that will get you is essentially a members only video once a week. And the reason I've decided to do this under the membership is because I really want to do videos based on really big books. And I want to split these really big books into multiple videos. So my goal, looking a year down the line or whatever, is to be able to do a series of videos on some of the classics that we all wish we've read, but maybe have a hard time reading because they've got so many allusions in them that are hard to understand, or they have a lot of historical cultural context, or they're just challenging reads. So some of the books that I'm looking to do in these series are, for instance, Anna Karenina, Ulysses by James Joyce, the Decameron by Boccaccio. What others? We could do Swan's Way by Proust. I mean, there are so many of these massive books that I would love to go through along with you. But I really want to do this on the membership because I think I have, kind of two different types of viewers. And these very particularly literary videos don't play so well to a larger audience, and a larger audience might be like, why is she doing 15 videos on the same book? and then that will cause people to flee, because when I find when I put up a video about literature that's more obscure, like William Carlos Williams, will actually lose a few subscribers, and so I don't want to stop making those videos, but I actually want to make them a great deal more because they're the videos I like making the most. But I want to put them in a separate platform so those who want them can access them. So they'll be members only, again, $5 a month. And I'm going to release the first one next Sunday. So you'll get the first video on the book that I have chosen. The book we're starting with is Anna Karenina. And the video today is going to be about a Marie de France poem that's teaching us about courtly love, to kind of prepare us for Anna Karenina, for those who want to get a membership and join me in reading this book. You can see it's huge, but it's one of the best books written ever, right? And so I feel like we should read it together, and if you've ever wanted to read it, now is your time. We'll read it together. I would suggest that you purchase the book. I'm using the Barnes & Noble translation, and I'll put more information on the membership channel for you. But my goal is to explore not just the novel, but the Russian history that gave birth to this novel, the author Tolstoy himself, who had a fascinating life. We'll also explore his life, and we'll look at Russian fashion, Russian music, because this time period of Russia brought forth so much extraordinary art. And as a French horn player, I know a great deal about the Russian composers like Tchaikovsky, because he wrote one of the best French horn solos. So we'll even look at that, the French horn solo in his symphony. And so I really wanted to just be an exploration of how do we read a text in 3D, how do we read in 4D, with all of these different texts working together. When I read, I really like to read intertextually, which means I like to pull in multiple different texts, and we're not just looking at this book, but we're looking at a multiplicity of books alongside it. So you'll get to experience this book on multiple levels, and I hope that you will comment your perspectives and your ideas. So it's a bit like a class that you can just follow along, except you don't get any credit for it. No credit. But it's also much cheaper than, a $4,000 class. So just $5 a month. And once we finish with Anna Karenina, we'll move on to another book, and we'll vote on that next book. So I'm hoping to create a kind of a literary community there for those of you who are very fond of the literary videos, and I know that you're a smaller number than the overall videos. So please think about joining me there. There will be one video a week, just based on a section of the text, and I'll look through it and break it up accordingly and release some sort of schedule for what's coming out and when. But I hope that will be fun, and I'm looking to start it, mostly for myself, because I love, again, to read these longer books, and I know that I will read them with the proper attention if I'm doing this, and I would love to hear everybody else's responses as well. So, again, just $5 a month. You can sign up through the YouTube membership. And I really hope to see you there. I already recognize a lot of your names, for those of you who comment a great deal, so it would be great to get to talk about literature with you a little bit more closely. So that being said, I wouldn't want to just log on just to do this. We're going to talk about, because Anna Karenina is, of course, as we know, about an affair. And it's about a woman seeking a sort of sexual liberation in a time where women's roles were very, very limited. And so I finished the previous video about unicorns talking about courtly love, and I said that I would get to Marie de France. So now I'm going to read just kind of a bedtime story, a fairy tale by Marie de France for you. And it's a kind of silly story. It's called Lanval, and it is very much a fairy tale. But it's a fairy tale that's very critical of courtly life and courtly love. And it's kind of seen as one of these first feminist poems, even though we wouldn't currently look at it as feminist. And so it deals with a lot of the themes of courtly love. And I spoke a little bit in the previous video about how courtly love put a lot of attention into adultery, because women were caught in loveless marriages, and they were seen as women who needed rescuing, liberation. And the way that they would be liberated was sexually by a knight, and that knight would worship her. And the only way that she would seek kind of freedom was through adultery. And we see that in this book, and we also see it in this book as well. So I'll read a little bit from this one. This is one of my favorite books, Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence. And so we'll look a little bit at this one as well, and how the lady of this book seeks freedom in an affair. But primarily we'll think about, in this book itself, the relationship between men and women, and the liberty of that relationship. So we'll think more about, not go into the affair part, but D.H. Lawrence's musings on the relationships between men and women, and how they work. So there's that one. And I also have Aurora Leigh, which is an incredible poetry book, and this book called Want. And so I'm going to kind of go through these a little bit throughout this video. The reason for that is that Marie de France was the first French female poet. She wrote in the 1100s, France, and she wrote these things called lays. And lays were really a brand new type of poetry, brand new type of art that was very, very important and made her quite a name. And so she was very well known in society. She was likely associated with Henry II's court. And so she lived from 1160 to 1215, and she heard essentially these folk tales from the Bretons, from the Celts, essentially Celtic and Breton stories that were sung orally and transmitted orally. And she was actually one of the first people, this Marie de France woman, to write down folk tales and to catalogue them, essentially. She published actually a whole collection of Aesop's fables, so she was very interested in folk tales. So she wrote these lays based on Britain and Celtic legends, and a lot of these legends are Arthurian legends, so they're of the King Arthur and his round table. And so Lanval is based off of those legends, and she heard them from these traveling singers and troubadours, and she wrote them down in a brand new French form, which was so popular that it made her a bit of a pioneer, a literary pioneer. But most importantly, she was a pioneer because she's the first woman to be writing these things down. So we get a female perspective on courtly love from Marie de France, and how a woman feels when she is trapped in loveless marriages and this odd version of love based on a knight pursuing a married woman, and these ideals of female perfection. So we'll talk a lot about female perfection today, and the pitfalls of it, and also the beauty of it, because it can be both things when we read her story. Now I believe, and this is merely a theory, there's no proof, because Marie de France, we don't know who she is. She is a mystery. There's a general idea, like I said, that she belonged to Henry II's court, and there are some theories about who she is, but none that are specific. She's kind of like Elena Ferrante in that way. We don't know who she is, but we kind of think we do. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, so it's based on Arthurian legend, right? And I believe that the fairy queen in this book, or in this lay that we're going to read, Lanval, is Morgan Le Fay. I do think that is who she is, because when Marie de France was writing in 1160 to 1215, Morgan Le Fay was not yet considered antagonistic. So Morgan Le Fay, like the Queen of the Fairies, Morgan of the Fairies, she appears in Arthurian stories, in retellings of them in like the 1100s, and she appears in La Vita Merlini, as a woman who is described as healing Arthur when he arrives at Avalon. So if you don't know about Arthur, watch my video on fairies, the J.R.R. Tolkien video on fairies, because I do go into Arthurian legend at the end of that. But when she was considered the woman who healed him when he arrived, or attempted to heal him when he arrived on Avalon. So she was a great healer. Now legend says that she was the half-sister of Arthur, and over time Morgan Le Fay began to be depicted as far more antagonistic, particularly antagonistic to Guinevere, Queen Guinevere. And sometimes she was even depicted as Arthur's greatest enemy, scheming to take over the throne. And so at first she was a beautiful, benevolent savior, a goddess, a fairy with mystical powers who did good to Arthur. But gradually she began to transform into something far more sordid. This woman, an apprentice of Merlin's, who becomes an adversary to her half-brother, attempting to take over control. And I do wonder if that is a reaction to a sentiment of women, or for women, that women who are morally ambiguous or ordinary, because ordinary people are morally ambiguous, that those types of women began to seem very, very dangerous. We actually have Chaucer could be considered the first real poet to write about an ordinary woman, believe it or not. Oops, I'm so sorry, that was so loud. With the wife of Bath, right, in his Canterbury Tales. She's the first really ordinary woman. And this came a bit later. But she's ordinary because she lives a life. And that life is full of decisions that aren't perfect, because our lives don't allow us to make perfect decisions. The only woman who is truly perfect is the woman who does not live a life. Right? So this book is one I might talk about one day, but this is all about the wife of Bath and how she's a depiction of the first ordinary woman who has multiple affairs with multiple men, who has her own business, who works as a kind of mercantile, and is flawed. And she's all right with her flaws, even if she is mercilessly attacked for them. So this Marie de France poem depicts a fairy queen who is perfect, and she is more perfect than Queen Guinevere and his court, and her court, with King Arthur. King Arthur, in fact, and the Round Table and Guinevere, they are deeply, deeply flawed, but they are a representation of courtly love. And Marie de France in this is saying that the courtly love of this world is flawed, and it forces people into uncompromising positions. But the fairy queen in this book offers a more perfect love, one where the fairy queen has agency and power, and she is not a frightened or unhappy woman trapped in a loveless marriage. Rather, she is a happy woman who has a court of her own, no man, and goes into the forest and chooses her lover for herself. And so while it may seem like it is yet another exploration of the perfect woman in the form of the fairy, her perfection is merely a subplot. Really, the perfection is that she is of her own court, with no husband, and she is able to go into the woods and choose a mortal man for herself. And so in this way, the liberated woman, the woman with no husband, she is divine, right? So there's something to be said that the woman who stays alone and chooses for herself, there is a divine perfection to that woman. And the woman who is forced in a loveless marriage and searches for men outside of her marriage to keep her happy, that is the woman who is not the divine. That is an imperfect woman. But to talk about perfection in any way is a problem, and I think we're always applying it to women. And so I want to talk about the perfection issue by going to Aurora Leigh, and I want to read from this section. This is by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. It's an entire book, and eventually I'll do a video on this entire book. Membership maybe probably on the main channel, because this is one of my favorite books. She writes about her mother, right, and the absence so often of female figures who are multifaceted. This is how her father meets her mother, and it's very much the love at first sight of courtly love, right? You see a person from across the room, and suddenly you're in love, and that was the ideal of courtly love in the medieval age, or in the Middle Ages, is that you would fall immediately in love with someone, and that's what happens to Lanval in this poem. But this is what Aurora Leigh says, or Elizabeth Barrett Browning says in Aurora Leigh, of her father meeting her mother. As he stood in Florence, where he had come to spend a month, and note the secret of Da Vinci's drains, he musing somewhat absently perhaps some English question whether men should pay the unpopular but necessary tax with the left or right hand, in the alien sun, in that great square of the Santissima, there drifted past him, scarcely marked enough to move his comfortable island scorn, a train of priestly banners, cross and psalm, the white-veiled, rose-crowned maidens holding up tall tapers, weighty for such wrists, aslant to the blue, luminous tremor of the air, and letting drop the white wax as they went to eat the bishop's wafer at the church, from which long trail of chanting priests and girls, a face flashed like a symbol on his face, and shook with silent clangor brain and heart, transfiguring him to music. Thus, even thus, he too received his sacramental gift with Eucharistic meanings, for he loved. Now, this was not written at the time of courtly love. This was written in like the 1800s. When exactly? Oh dear. I can't find it when it was written. But she lived from 1806 to 1861, Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Oh, when was it published? We'll never know. We'll never know. In the 1800s. Long after courtly love had risen and died, right? But it didn't go anywhere. It didn't go anywhere, even though we think it did. So you can see here how much love is associated with the religious. You see that? Her face flashed like a symbol on his face. So there's that crashing music. And then we see how he was transfigured, a high religious term, into music. Her face turned him into music itself. Courtly love was spoken about through troubadours, through poems. Marie de Francis' lays would likely be performed with music. And so he received his sacramental gift. So love itself is the sacrament. It is a religious importance to love. And there is nothing more pure and more religious and holy than to love. And she shows it right here in this depiction of how her father met her mother. She was in a priestly procession and he was watching. She was religiously pure, religiously perfect. Now that seems all well and good, right? This is not an ordinary woman, right? This is a woman who is idealized. And this is the 1800s in which it's happening. What happens to this mother, this perfect mother? I'll let you guess. She dies, of course. So if you go, when she dies, she becomes cemented in her perfection forever. The really only way to maintain perfection, again, is to not live at all. So we go to page 8. Let me find where she writes about her mother caught in a photograph. Not a photograph, a painting. Let's see. And thus, beloved, she died. I've heard it said that but to see him in the first surprise of widower and father, nursing me, unmothered little child of 4 years old, his large man's hands afraid to touch my curls, as if the gold would tarnish, his grave lips contriving such a miserable smile, as if he knew needs must, or I should die, and yet was hard, what would almost make the stones cry out for pity. There is a verse he said in Santa Croce to her memory. So this is really beautiful because then the father is taking on the womanly role to keep his daughter alive. He's making that sacrifice. Weep for an infant too young to weep much, when death removed this mother, stops the mirth. Today on women's faces when they walk, with rosy children hanging on their gowns, under the cloister to escape the sun that scorches in the piazza. After which he left our Florence and made haste to hide himself, his prattling child, in silent grief, among the mountains above Pelagio. Because unmothered babes, he thought, had need of Mother Nature more than others use, and Pan's white goats, with udders warm and full of mystic contemplations, come to feed poor milkless lips of orphans like his own. So here she's saying, you take the child without a mother to the woods, because in the woods there's Pan, and there are so many of the fairy world. And there are other ways, and Mother Nature will raise the daughter. And the perfect fairy queen is oftentimes a representation of Mother Nature. She is queen of a court that represents the beauty of the natural earth. Such scholar scraps he talked, I've heard from friends, for even prosaic men who wear grief long will get to wear it as a hat aside with a flower stuck in it. Father then and child, we lived among the mountains many years, God's silence on the outside of the house, and we who did not speak too loud within, and old Assunta to make up the fire, crossing herself, whenever a sudden flame, which lighted from the firewood, made alive that picture of my mother on the wall. So here is the perfect woman caught on the wall. The painter drew it after she was dead, and when the face was finished, throat in hands, her camarera carried him in hate of the English-fashioned shroud, the last brocade she dressed in at the pity. He should paint no sadder thing than that, she swore, to wrong her poor Signora. Therefore very strange the fact was, I, a little child, would crouch for hours upon the floor with knees drawn up, and gaze across them, half in terror, half in adoration, at the picture there, that swan-like supernatural white life, just sailing upward from the red stiff silk, which seemed to have no part in it, no power to keep it from quite breaking out of bounds. For hours I sat and stared, Assunta's awe, and my poor father's melancholy eyes still pointed that way. That way went my thoughts when wandering beyond sight, and as I grew in years I mixed, confused, unconsciously, whatever I last read or heard or dreamed, abhorrent, admirable, beautiful, pathetical, or ghastly, or grotesque, with still that face, which did not therefore change, but kept the mystic level of all forms, hates, fears, and admirations, was by turns ghost, fiend, and angel, fairy, witch, and sprite, a dauntless muse whose eyes a dreadful fate, a loving Psyche who loses sight of love, a still Medusa with mild milky brows, all curled and clothed upon with snakes whose slime falls fast as sweat will, or anon Our Lady of Passion stabbed with swords where the babe sucked, or Lamia in her first moonlighted pallor, ere she shrunk and blinked and shuddering wriggled down to the unclean, or my own mother, leaving her last smile in her last kiss upon the baby mouth, my father pushed down on the bed for that, or my dead mother, without smile or kiss, buried at Florence. All which images, concentrated on that picture, glassed themselves before my meditative childhood, as the incoherencies of change and death are represented fully, mixed and merged, in the smooth, fair mystery of perpetual life. I don't even know what to say. It's exceptional. Just the list, and it gathers in momentum. All of these things and all of these women and all of these figures that are contained in the single woman's face, the mother's face, caught in the picture. A mother who is so beautiful and so flawless and yet is not there. And so she is mourned and she is thought about and she becomes everything and nothing all at once. So I wanted to bring our attention to that because of the depiction of courtly love that we see in the 1800s and how much that concept of courtly love has not really gone away when we think about women's perfection and the idea that women are trapped and ought to be saved. This is a common thing that we think about now, and us women even, we think about it ourselves, and that it is men who will save us, or and it takes a lot of thinking and working hard to kind of snap yourself out of that condition, because we know it's not true. Because what happened to that perfect woman was she died, and she became forever a picture that was both a sight of love and horror to her daughter, who never knew her. So yeah, that is a beautiful book. The poetry is extraordinary. It's Aurora Leigh is Elizabeth Barrett Browning's attempt to write a poem entirely for herself. She said, I'm going to write this. Let me see. She puts it in the introduction, why she writes it, and it's really cool. She says, of writing many books there is no end, and no end to talking about books, which is the goal. And I, who have written much in prose and verse for others' uses, will write now for mine, will write my story for my better self, as when you paint for your portrait for a friend, who keeps it in a drawer and looks at it long after he has ceased to love you, just to hold together what he was and is. So it's a poem that she intends to use to hold together what was and what is. And that's what literature does, and that's what Marie de France did. She held together an image of a powerful woman at a time when powerful women were in very precarious positions, because their power perhaps came from marriages, and in a way that marriage rendered them powerless. So they were in an odd position. And so Lanval is a story based on a Arthurian legend, in which I believe that the queen here is Morgan Le Fay. And it's not for certain. This is just my theory. And I'm just going to read to you the entire poem. It's just going to be a nice good night story. So close your eyes, lie down, and listen. This is a translation. It's hard to translate the poem into the original rhyme, and this is one that was translated into the original rhyme. So it's a little silly, and some of the rhymes are funny, but I think the story's meant to be a little cheeky. And so what happens, I'll give you a summary before I start, is Lanval is in the court of Arthur. He's one of the knights of the Round Table. And the Round Table, ideally, was supposed to be this great place of equality, that all the knights were treated the same. But poor Lanval was forgotten, and though he was a great, great soldier, or knight rather, King Arthur forgot to congratulate him or give him the gifts that he ought to have gotten. He just forgot about poor Lanval. And there were a lot of people who were jealous of Lanval as well because he was so successful. So there might have been some malicious intent in that forgetting. In that, oh, he's so good that we don't want to congratulate him because they're a bit jealous of him. So a lot of human folly is present in this court that's not supposed to be, because King Arthur is supposed to be this flawless, perfect place with the Round Table and these great military victories and so on and so forth. But poor Lanval is not represented that way. And he meets this nice fairy in the forest. He goes out in the forest because he feels rejected by King Arthur's court, and he's like, let's go in the forest. And he goes in the forest, and oh, lo and behold, there is a great fairy in the forest, and she goes to him, and she decides that she wants him to be her partner. And she asks him, or tells him she will be his lover, but under one condition, that he never tells anyone of their relationship. And he agrees, and they are very happy together in this secret love. That's another aspect of courtly love. It was always secrecy, never tell, always love in private. A love made public will not be true. It will be tarnished in some way. And so he goes into Now he goes back to King Arthur's court and meets Guinevere, and Guinevere's like, ooh, I like you. You should have an affair with me. And Lanval's like, no, I would never. And she's like, well, why not? And he says, well, I don't want to. And she gets very, very upset about this. And so she lashes out, and she tells King Arthur that he was cruel to her and rude and spoke to her in ways that no one should ever speak. And so he's brought to court at the Round Table. They would have courts of love. It was very important. And he said, I have a lover, and my lover is fairer than Guinevere, far more beautiful than Guinevere ever could be. Even her handmaidens are more beautiful than Guinevere. Naturally, Guinevere doesn't like this, and she's very insulted. And that's why he gets brought to court. I forgot that insult to her beauty. And so he, by telling Guinevere of his lover, breaks that one rule, which is the fairy will only love him if he tells no one of her existence. So he breaks that, and then we see what happens from there. So I'm just going to read it. It might take a little while, so definitely sit back, relax, and enjoy. Okay, Lanval. I shall tell you another lay, a true story. It happened this way, to a noble man whose name in Breton is Lanval. Now let me go on. You have heard of Arthur, who was a great king. He had gone to Carlisle, where the Scots and the Picts had come on raids, and he wanted to keep them from progressing further into his lands in their ragged and destructive bands. It was at Pentecost, and he gave rich gifts to his noble and brave barons and knights of the Round Table. In all the world no one would be able to find a finer company of men. To each the king awarded lands and wives he thought accorded with what they had done and had deserved, and how each one of them had served. But there was one whom he forgot, and for whose sake somehow there was not a good word anyone put in. Valorous, he was able to win jousts and battles, and generous, so that others were envious. The son of a noble king, he'd come to join Arthur's household from a distant land. Arthur never rewarded him for any endeavor, and it never crossed his mind to ask for any payment for a task he thought he owed by courtesy, and thus was reduced to penury. For all these reasons, disrespected and unrewarded, he was dejected, far away from his home, with no friend to whom he was able to go to ask for advice on how to contrive to keep himself and his hopes alive. One day he mounted his horse and went into the country to try to content himself with flowers and pale blue skies, having been told that in his wise one can restore a troubled soul sometimes. That was his only goal. He reached a meadow that had a brook, and he dismounted. His horse then took a chill and trembled. Lanval removed its bridle and saddle, for he loved the animal. He let it graze in the meadow and gambol in the ways that horses do. Stretched out upon the grass, he allowed himself a yawn, and then he noticed downstream 2 damsels dressed in tunics of blue, beautiful of figure and face, and approaching with incredible grace. One carried vessels of gold, and one a linen towel with embroidery done in tiny stitches. Being polite, Lanval rose, as any knight would, to greet them. One of them said, "Our mistress, whose tent is up ahead, welcomes you. She is wise and fair. Come with us, we will take you there." The horse was happily grazing, and he saw no reason not to be grateful. He followed along behind the 2, and was amazed to find a pavilion of which Semiramis would have been proud. Octavian never stood in a finer tent. The top was graced by a golden eagle that had been placed to catch the sunlight and declare the enormous wealth and glory there of the occupant, who turned out to be a maiden of great beauty. She surpassed the lily and the rose. She lay on the bed in languid repose, on a coverlet that surely cost more than a castle would. The damsel wore a filmy shift, for the day was warm, and it displayed her lovely form to great advantage. Her complexion might have rivaled even the hawthorn's white. The maiden called her knight to come closer, which he did with some hesitation. She put him at ease at once, saying such words as these: "My friend, I have come from a distant land in search of you to bestow my hand, and the rest of me as well, if you are the one truly worthy few, if you are one of the truly worthy few. I shall make you happier than an emperor or king. You can enjoy the rich life you have earned." To this Lanval at once returned. "Nothing could please me more than to be loved by you. You will find in me a loyal servant. Nothing you ask will be too onerous a task for me to undertake. I shall resist any other large or small temptations, but serve only you, as I shall be honored and grateful to do." She invited him forthwith into bed, and while he was lying there, she said, "I shall grant you one more thing, that any wish you make will bring instant fulfillment. Give away or spend however much you may, you will have more to give or spend, a bottomless treasure that cannot end. But there is one proviso that I give you, and you must live by. You must promise not to reveal our love or the source of your wealth. You seal your lips, or else you lose me for good. Do you agree? Have you understood?" They romped and frolicked all that day, but then the lady sent him away. with the promise that whenever he wished for her, immediately she would appear, eager to do his bidding. And no man but you will see or hear me. Of course, at this he was delighted and gave her a kiss, and then obediently arose. So stop here for a second. The beauty of this poem is the equality between them, that he is serving her in every way possible, and she is serving him in every way possible, and that she is giving him more in service and for his service than his own king. She is treating him better than the king treats him. And so it's almost saying that the love of a woman far surpasses everything else. And subsequently, that the love of a man who will respect you and serve you, just as a woman respects and serves her husband, is the primary. So it goes both ways. In that way, it's really wonderful. But she is a woman who is unmarried and yet has so much power, so much wealth behind her. And so that way, she is a liberated woman, though she is not real. She's a fairy. She's divine. The damsels gave him rich new clothes, which suited him and made him look like some fine prince in a picture book. They brought water in towels and stood while he washed. They then brought food. He and the lady dined on dishes of dainty meats and delicious fishes. At last he embraced her and said farewell, but there was no way he could tell how grateful he was or make mention of his delight and abiding love. He trotted off toward town and was in some confusion. Had it been a dream, a fantasy, a spell? There simply was no way to tell. And when he got home he was surprised that his staff had been metamorphosized, increased in number as he could see, and dressed in the fanciest livery. He gave a party that night, a fine spread with every kind of wine, and to this he contrived to invite every noble and every knight. It gave him satisfaction to feed the rich as well as those in need. So he's the image of the perfect chivalrous knight, someone who serves the weak and protects the poor. He gave to the poor, and in many jail he either set free or paid their bail. It was a life of joy beyond measure, that was only increased by his nightly pleasure, for he could call his beloved, and she would appear before him instantly. So in addition to this showing us like this powerful woman, separate from a man who makes her own choice, we also see a man in a depiction of masculinity and what masculinity ought to look like. And that is a man who serves and listens to his wife and observes her beliefs. And it is also a man who has honor and who has kindness and serves those in need. He is a protector. Right, a protector who takes care of people and is therefore taken care of by his partner. And so I love that even at this time in the 1100s, there was an image of a kind of love that one could fight for. Of course, this is based on a kind of physical beauty that, not ideal. But at that time, physical beauty was a lot of ways that one commented on perfection. So men are meant to be kind. They're meant to give to people. Giving. They create and they earn for the purpose of giving back. And that was an essential part of that masculine image. And women also had the same kind of intention. Okay, so shortly after St. John's Day, some 30 knights or more had come to relax and spend an agreeable hour in the gardens beneath the Queen's Watch Tower. Shortly after St. John's Day, some 30 knights or more had come to relax and spend an agreeable hour in the gardens beneath the Queen's Watch Tower. Gawain was among them. His fair and noble cousin Ywain was there. Gawain remarked that it wasn't right that they had treated Lanval with such slight respect. He is a generous man and courtly too. What reason can there be for our behavior? He comes from a land across the sea where his father is a king, and yet he is the one we always forget. For instance now, look around. I fear you will notice that Lanval's not here." They went to ask him to join them all, which he was unable to recall their having done before. Even so, he thanked them and said he would go. The queen and 3 of her ladies were reclining near an aperture in the stone wall when she caught sight of Lanval, a most attractive knight. She summoned, without hesitating, 30 of her ladies in waiting, the prettiest ones especially, to come with her to the garden to be entertained by the gentlemen there, and take the refreshing morning air. The knights delighted gathered about, the women who had deigned to come out, and banter with them in courtly ways, admiring them and offering praise, all but Lanval, that is, who withdrew to the garden's edge, impatient to return to his beloved and kiss and embrace her. He had no interest in this. The queen noticed that he was not participating, and to the spot where he was seated she went at once. Thinking he must be a perfect dunce, she explained that she wanted him, and to penetrate into his dim brain. This translation is pretty funny. She promised him gifts if he would come to her in secrecy, but he declined. "I serve the king and cannot betray him or do such a thing as you have proposed. It would not be allowed by the code of chivalry." The queen was furious and ashamed, and he was the one whom she blamed. "Lanval," she said, "I have heard it said that you do not welcome women in bed. You have your pages and grooms, and you sport with them, as some men do." She accuses him. Wow. "And this is sinful and wicked." Of course, homosexuality was very, very frowned upon at this time. Very frowned upon. "The king cannot endure the taint you bring to the court and the entire nation. He cannot risk his soul's salvation for the sake of your peculiar taste or allow himself to be disgraced." Lanval, not at all pleased, replied, "Lady, what you suggest in your snide and snarky way is not at all true. The fact is I love a lady who is worth far more than any I know, and let me tell you before I go that any one of her serving lasses in body and face and worth surpasses you, not to mention goodness of heart. Now if you let me, I'll depart." Now he makes a grave error, because he's not allowed to tell anyone that he loves this woman, and here he's gone and done it, so But it was the queen who left, and she was in tears and mortified that he had spoken so. She took to her bed, and to her chambermaids she said she'd never get up again unless the king would in his mercilessness, in the name of justice and of the right, punish this disrespectful knight. Now, I love this section because you can tell it was written by a woman. I think it feels very truthful that when a man attacks your appearance or pushes you aside when you make an advance, the shame you feel is extraordinary, and it comes from having so much of your identity put into your appearance that any attack on your appearance is devastating in a lot of ways. At least it was for me. It's not so much now because I'm older and I have more things to be proud of. But as a girl, yes, any attack on my appearance was horrible. And especially in this world where so much of your value is in your beauty and the great queen's beauty, any attack would be a shameful thing. She doesn't look at Guinevere as some sort of villainous woman, but rather someone who is insecure and ashamed when it's revealed. So, the king returned from a splendid day of hunting. He came to the queen to say good afternoon, but she was distressed. She fell on her knees and in tear addressed his majesty. "Lanval has made shameful remarks to me. I'm afraid he is not fit to be serving you. He had the nerve to compare me to another lady whose servants were more beautiful. He said he'd prefer any one of them to me." The king was displeased, for not only she had been insulted, but he also. Was he a man of honor or no? He swore to the queen that unless his knight could defend himself in court, he might be facing the gallows or even the stake. he sent for 3 of his men to take Lanval prisoner. They went to fetch him, already penitent, for he had been stupid and absurd and had lost his love by breaking his word. Nor could he summon her in his pain to apologize, if not to explain. So what will the lady do, the lady that he has betrayed? Will she come and save him or no? 100 times he called out and more to ask her forgiveness and to implore that she come and speak with him again, even if he was the worst of men. He cursed his brain, he cursed his loose tongue, and he heaped more abuse on his faithlessness. What could he do? I shall impart the story to you. The guards arrived to take him away to court. There could be no delay. The king had summoned him, and the queen had accused him, and she seemed most keen that Lanval should be tried and found guilty, and upon some ground or other be condemned to die. Lanval took this in with a sigh, and didn't care. He was either brave or convinced they were doing him a favor. Before the king he was subdued, while the king in his very angry mood said to him, "Vassal, you have been ill-advised to slander the queen, and still more culpable for insulting me. You boasted rather stupidly that the lady whom you love surpasses the queen in beauty, and even the lasses who serve her are more fair than she." And I think we have to think here, is it really beauty that she surpasses Guinevere in, or is it something else? Is it loyalty that she surpasses? Is beauty a stand-in for those other things? When they say beauty, is it really just the fairness? Because at this time, the physiognomy of people was important. How they looked reflected what was inside them. And so the beauty they're speaking about is more complex. This woman is loyal. This woman is giving. This woman is intelligent. This woman is powerful. And she has security. She's secure. She's not insecure. But then again, Guinevere in a lot of ways is a depiction of a true woman, of what a woman really is, right? A woman is oftentimes insecure. A woman desires things that she, freedom, and I don't know. I'm rambling a bit. I don't even know where I am anymore. Oh, but he wishes to die because there's no point of living without his fairy queen. Okay, on and on I go. Lanval explained most temperately that he was blameless and had not sought the queen's love, although he ought not to have spoken as he had, which he regretted, for the sad truth was that he had offended his love, and now their affair was ended. He did not apologize or plead for mercy. Whatever the king decreed would satisfy him. The king replied that a panel of knights would have to decide what should be done, lest there might be an appearance of impropriety. The knights agreed on a time when they might meet, and Lanval on that day gave his promise that he would appear. But who would pledge? He had no near relatives or friends who might give surety of the case of flight on Lanval's part. And so I'm going to skip ahead because it's very long. And then, so all the cases are heard. But there is no one for him, because the queen will not come anymore, as we know. And so it comes to the time to decide, and only there have been cases heard against him, and there is no one to say a case for him. And so here is when they are about to make the decision. There is hardly any doubt which way they would decide, but even as they were ready to announce it, they saw 2 maidens a little way off, but approaching quickly, dressed in purple taffeta of the best quality. They were a gorgeous pair, but who these ladies were and where they came from was a mystery. Gawain asked if one could be Lanval's lover, but he said no. The 2 dismounted and with slow, respectful steps approached the throne of Arthur to make their purpose known. They wanted chambers prepared that might be suitable for their mistress, with white silk curtains and a luxurious bed, on which she may deign to lay her head. Our mistress wishes to lodge with you, they said, and he was most willing to accomplish this and accommodate those 2 as well in rooms of the state. When they were gone, the king inquired as to the baron's decision. Tired of waiting, they answered him that they needed further time to say what should be done. There was an argument and contention now, and bitter dissent, which only came to a stop when two more beautiful maidens came into view, riding Spanish mules and wearing Phrygian silk. As they were staring at these new visitors, Ywain alerted Lanval and asked him, or rather blurted, "How gorgeous they are! Could one of them be your love?" He shook his head and denied having ever seen them before. I think we know that this is probably his lady who has sent them. Just as they were about to say what decision they'd come to, they saw another maiden appear on a white palfrey, caparisoned magnificently. They were stunned, every one of them, by the great cost of it. What man's estate could pay for it? And its rider, too, was breathtaking. Her eyes, bright blue, were dazzling. Her neck was white, and her blonde hair glistened in the light. She wore a tunic over a shift that showed a glimpse of her snowdrift white skin. Or say it was white as milk. The cloak she wore was of heavy silk. On her wrist a sparrowhawk rode, and at her side a wolfhound strode elegantly. Those who saw her passing by were struck with awe. Lanval's friends went to convey news of his maiden's arrival, and they expressed the hope that she might save him. Lanval sighed. Their description gave him certainty that it was she, his beloved. If she has come for me, then I am happy, but if not, it makes no difference to me what they may do to me. It was then that the lady entered the palace, and men fell silent. None had beheld such beauty as was unparalleled. The king, well-mannered, rose from his seat and held out his hands to her to greet. Now, when they say beauty unparalleled, I don't see it as beauty in the conventional sense of physical beauty, as I see it as a kind of power and a kind of presence that can attend to anyone of any looks or any station. There is a sense of immense strength when she arrives, and that is the seat of her strength and her of the feminist reading of this text, which is that she is a woman alone who comes to stand up for a man at court, a man who has betrayed her because he did the thing that he was not to do, and yet she has decided of her own accord to save him despite it, because she has the power and the kindness to do so. And so it is her presence. It is not her beauty, but her presence that is so magnificent. Beauty is just a stand-in for that. Okay. She then addressed the king. I come, as you may have guessed, because I have loved Lanval, whom you see standing here. I understand he has been accused in your court. He meant no harm and had no bad intent. He never sought the love of the queen or behaved like a vulgar libertine. The queen was wrong to say otherwise. And as for his foolish boast, your eyes may be the judge of what he claimed. Your barons need not be ashamed to grant that he spoke the truth and allow him to go free. Let them speak now. The king agreed that it should be as the judges said, and immediately they acquitted him. The lady withdrew, and so did those in her retinue. Outside the great hall there stood a huge block of marble, good for guards to stand on. Onto this Lanval climbed, for leaving the throne room the lady would pass close by, and when she did the knight could try to jump on her palfrey's crupper, which he managed to do successfully. He went with her, and from then on dwelt with her in Avalon, on a lovely island, the Bretons say, and who would know any better than they? And so that's why I think it's Morgan Le Fay, because she's associated with Avalon, and she is a woman of immense power, if she is associated with King Arthur. But anyway, that is a story about a woman at a time in which women were not alone, who loved alone, who made decisions on her own, and brought Lanval away from the deeply flawed masculine, chivalrous court of Arthur and brought him to a beautiful island of women, ruled by women. Oh, an island of women, ruled by women, where he was to live, loved by her. And she respected him and forgave him, which is something we need to love every time we see it, any sort of forgiveness. But yeah, that's just a little bedtime story, I suppose. I think it's cheeky that it has the rhymes. I love anything that rhymes, and I find rhymes absolutely hilarious. I don't know why. Anything could rhyme. It could be the most serious of things, but if it's got a rhyme, I just can't stop laughing. I think it's from reading children's books with rhymes in them. It's just associated with silly things. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to move on from I'm in my medieval era right now. It's getting a little ridiculous. I'm going to move on from my medieval era, I promise. My next video will not be on King Arthur. I swear. So anyway, I look forward to seeing you again, and please sign up to read Anna Karenina with me. I would love it if you did, because I just think it's going to be so fun. And anyway, have a great night. It's been so wonderful, and I hope you have a wonderful sleep, and I'll see you again soon. Bye, everyone.